All right, welcome back to Sip and Talk, everyone. So glad you could join us.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We've got a big one for you today.
We really do. We're going to be looking at something we're calling the Civilizational Illness Trilogy. It's basically what happens when, decades of massive success start to, go sideways.
Sideways is a gentle way to put it. It's more like the success starts to eat its own future.
That's a perfect way to put it. Let's start with Taiwan. You hear people there, and they're constantly talking about low wages, this insane internal competition they call involution.
Oh, yeah.
Housing costs that are just in another galaxy, and of course, the political fights every single day.
And it's not just them saying it. I mean, The Economist even gave this whole cocktail of issues a name, the Taiwan disease.
They did? Wow.
It describes a system that looks great from the outside, economically strong, but is pretty sick on the inside.
Okay, so if Taiwan feels tough, you just have to look across the water to South Korea.
Yeah.
They are. They're taking this idea of hell Joseon, life being rigged, and playing it on hard mode.
It's a whole other level.
Yeah.
If Taiwan's issue is like a chronic, dull ache, Korea's is more like a sharp, screaming anxiety attack.
And the thing about the Korean situation is it's not just, them being dramatic. It's backed up by cold, hard OECD data.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking about some of the highest working hours in the developed world, this crippling academic arms race, credentialism, they call it.
Right.
And then that fertility rate, it's at 0.72. That's a world record low. It's just staggering.
When you look at their population chart, it's not a gentle slope down, it's a cliff. It honestly looks like the government accidentally hit a self-destruct button that's set to go off in 2 generations.
They are definitely screaming on the way down.
And while they're doing that, you've got Japan right next door, kind of going through what you could call a chronic death.
They're sort of the ghost of Christmas future. They're about 30 years ahead of everyone else in this cycle.
3 decades of a flatlining economy, the world's fastest aging population. But they're doing it with this, quiet resignation.
It's a collective fatigue. They're just kind of quietly accepting this decline instead of screaming about it.
So you pull the camera back from Asia and you realize this is happening everywhere. Everyone has a problem. The diagnosis is just a little different depending on where you are.
Exactly. Europe, for instance, is grappling with what you might call the unspoken pain, this massive issue with migration, failed integration, deep cultural clashes.
And nobody in charge wants to talk about it openly.
Right. They can't or they won't. And then here in the U.S., we're stuck in our own political polarization deathmatch.
It feels like we're living in 2 completely different countries, 2 different realities depending on what news you watch.
It makes everything from governing to just having a normal conversation feel like a struggle.
So here's what we want to do today. We're not here to have a misery competition to figure out who has it worse.
No.
We're trying to understand why. Why does every major global player have this giant elephant in the room? And these elephants, they've all developed their own special skills.
That's a good way to frame it.
We've kind of broken it down into 4 types. You've got Taiwan, the economic stagnation type.
South Korea, which is the hellish competition type.
Japan is the acute aging type.
And then the U.S. and Europe are what we're calling the cultural and political fracture type.
We've gone through a ton of reports, economic analyses, sociological studies, all to try and paint a really clear picture of what these elephants actually look like.
So let's start with Taiwan. Let's get into the system that really hits your bank account first.
Okay, let's do it. Unpacking the Taiwan disease.
Oh.
What is the technical definition? What's the core of the problem?
So the core of it, according to the analysts we've looked at, really centers on monetary policy, specifically the Central Bank of Taiwan, the CBC. Yeah. For decades, they've had this policy of intentionally keeping the new Taiwan dollar, the NTD, artificially undervalued.
Undervalued. So cheap on the international market. And the goal there is obvious, right? Make your exports more competitive.
Exactly. It's all about supporting those tech giants, keeping that huge current account surplus. On paper, it looks like a massive success. The country's foreign reserves are enormous.
But there's a side effect. That's the disease part.
That is the disease. The country relies on this cheap currency, but it hasn't put the right fiscal systems in place to manage the wealth it creates. And that leads directly to the symptoms everyone complains about. Low wages, insane housing costs, and some pretty serious financial risks building up under the surface.
Okay, this is the part that I find fascinating, how a currency strategy can directly fuel inequality.
Yeah.
How does a decision at the central bank actually affect what an average person gets in their paycheck?
It's all about where the money goes. So let's say a big exporter earns 100 million US dollars. If the market rate should be, say, 28 NTD to $1, they'd get 2.8 billion NTD. But if the central bank steps in and holds the rate down at like 32 to 1,
they suddenly have 3.2 billion NTD.
Exactly. That extra 400 million NTD is basically profit that was just created by policy. It's an exchange gain.
And the big question is, where does that 400 million go?
It goes to the shareholders. It goes to executive bonuses and capital returns. It does not go into the paychecks of the rank and file employees.
Because their wages are set based on the local cost of living, not on these huge international profits.
Precisely. So the system is just designed to widen that gap between the salaried class, whose real pay is actually going down, and the asset-owning class, who are getting rich off these repatriated dollars.
So workers are making the company successful, but the profits are engineered to bypass them.
Right.
And that has to tie directly into the housing crisis, right? That's the asset price inflation.
It does. To keep that exchange rate low, the central bank has to print NTD to buy up all the US dollars coming in from the exporters.
Which floods the country with cash.
It floods the domestic market with what economists call excess liquidity. And in a small island economy, where's all that cheap money going to go?
Real estate.
Real estate. It puts this incredible pressure on property, especially in places like Taipei or the tech hub in Hsinchu. It drives prices so high that for a normal person on a normal salary, owning a home becomes, a total fantasy.
So you're getting hit twice. Your wages are stuck, and the one thing you need to live a home is inflating away from you.
And there's a third hit, too. Crippled purchasing power.
Right, because an undervalued currency makes anything imported way more expensive.
Absolutely. A cheap NTD is great for exporters, but terrible for consumers. You want to buy a high-end coffee machine from Italy for, say, $1,000? Well, that policy decision just costs you thousands more in NTD.
It just chips away at your quality of life, even while the national accounts look amazing.
And there's a fourth problem, too. It makes the whole economy kind of lazy. Well, the weak currency is like a life support system for companies that aren't very competitive. They don't have to innovate or invest in R&D.
Because they can always just sell their stuff cheap overseas.
Right. It removes the pressure for them to actually upgrade and transform, which is what a healthy economy should be doing.
Okay, let's talk about that financial time bomb you mentioned. How exactly is the central bank keeping the currency low, and why is that risky?
So, to manage all those incoming US dollars, the CBC needs help. They need someone to absorb that currency. So they basically encourage big financial firms, especially life insurance companies, to buy and hold huge amounts of U.S. dollar assets.
Mostly U.S. bonds.
Mostly U.S. bonds, yeah. So these insurance companies are now massively exposed to any swings in the exchange rate.
Because their assets are in dollars, but their obligations are in NTD.
Exactly. So if the NTD were to suddenly strengthen what the economists called a messy correction, these companies would face catastrophic currency losses.
Give me an example.
A big insurer holding, say, 10 billion US dollars in assets could lose hundreds of billions of NTD if the rate shifts just a few points. A shock like that could trigger a systemic financial crisis.
That is actually really scary. The whole export success story is built on a pretty fragile foundation. So what does the central bank say to all this? What's their defense?
They have a couple of arguments. First, they deny that they're intentionally keeping the rate low long term. They say they only step in for dynamic stability.
To prevent big sudden shocks, basically trying to avoid getting called a currency manipulator by the U.S.
Right. And second, they play the competition card. They argue that if they let the NTD get stronger, their exporters would get crushed by competitors in Korea or China, and that would lead to huge job losses.
So they frame it as protecting workers.
They do. They also try to say that low wages and high housing costs are totally separate issues, caused by things like land policy, not their currency strategy.
Okay, but let's poke some holes in that. I mean, stability is one thing, but the critique is about the long-term bias, right?
That's the logical flaw, exactly. The proof is in the pudding. The IMF has pointed out for years that Taiwan has this consistently massive current account surplus. That surplus is the evidence of the bias.
And blaming competitors just traps them in this beggar-thy-neighbor race to the bottom, where their own citizens end up paying the price.
And the part about housing is just, it's evasive.
It seems completely disingenuous.
It is. Yes, land policy matters, but the CBC's actions are what's pumping all that cheap money directly into the asset market. They're the ones holding the hose. To deny they're inflating asset prices is just ignoring how capital flows.
So if you're a young person in Taiwan staring down this system,
Yeah.
what do you do? How do you survive this disease?
You basically have to play the game that exists, not the one you wish existed. So first, since all the wealth is in the export sector, you have to internationalize your skills.
You have to make yourself indispensable.
You have to be that top-tier semiconductor engineer, that AI researcher, the person the company cannot lose, even if the currency swings 10%. You have to get into the high-margin part of the economy where the pay is better.
And second, you have to globalize your own assets.
Right. Since the policy is designed to erode the value of your NTD savings over time, you need to move some of your money into US dollar-denominated assets. Global ETFs, mutual funds.
You're hedging against your own country's monetary policy.
You are. And you're also protecting yourself from that messy correction risk we talked about.
And the third thing is pushing for real reform. The big idea here seems to be creating a sovereign wealth fund.
This is the key structural fix. Instead of all that foreign cash flooding back into the domestic real estate market, an SWF would invest those profits overseas in a diversified portfolio.
Like Norway does with its oil money.
Exactly. It would reduce the asset bubbles at home and build long-term national wealth.
So why hasn't it happened? It seems so obvious.
Political inertia. The exporters love the cheap currency. The central bank doesn't want to give up its power over the exchange rate. It would take a huge political effort and deep fiscal reforms, like higher capital gains taxes.
And the people benefiting from the disease have no incentive to cure it.
That's the hard truth. It's incredibly profitable for the established elite.
Wow. Okay, that's a fantastic breakdown of the Taiwan disease.
Yeah.
A system that creates this feeling of passive resignation, lying flat, as they say. Now let's pivot to Korea, the hellish competition type. If Taiwan is depressed, Korea is having a panic attack.
That's a great way to put it, because if Taiwan's problem forces people into silence, Korea's problem forces them to scream. It's an illness rooted in these incredibly distorted social values.
And the illusion from the outside is just so powerful. The K-pop, the K-dramas, it makes the country look like this unstoppable cultural and tech juggernaut.
It does, but Korea is like one of those beautiful, super expensive designer handbags. It's perfectly polished on the outside, but you open it up, and it's just stuffed with anxiety, debt, and social time bombs. All that national success is built on sacrificing the individual for this one single, incredibly narrow path to success.
And that path is either getting into a chaebol, you know, a giant conglomerate like Samsung, or becoming a global superstar. There's no middle ground.
And that funneling process starts in the education system, which it's not really about learning anymore. It's a high-efficiency social class filter.
A filter.
The whole system is designed to find the kids who can tolerate the most pressure, who are the most obedient, and who have the most endurance for test taking, not the most creative or innovative.
Stories you hear about Korean high school students, it sounds like boot camp.
It's worse. They're studying 14, 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
School, then private academies called Hagwon, then tutors until midnight. Sleep deprivation is just normal. It's a badge of honor.
And this system just locks in the class structure, doesn't it?
Completely. The cost of all that elite private tutoring is astronomical. It creates this huge barrier. Rich kids get the best resources, which all but guarantees they get into the top universities. So education ends up solidifying the class structure, not enabling mobility.
The pressure is so intense it even spills over into how you look. This idea of appearance as hard currency.
This is a core psychological feature of Hell Joseon. In such a competitive environment, your physical appearance is treated like a necessary credential, just like your university degree. We call it outward appearance capitalization.
So things like plastic surgery aren't just about vanity. They're seen as a required investment to get a good job or a good spouse.
It's a transaction. You're investing in yourself to get a better return in the job market, the marriage market, everywhere. You have to conform to this very narrow collective standard of beauty just to get your foot in the door.
And I imagine social media and K-pop just poured gasoline on that fire.
It's an accelerant. The flawless filtered images of idols and influencers create what we've called digital status syndrome. People are trying to mimic a standard of perfection that isn't even human. It's created by stylists and algorithms.
How can you not feel inadequate when you're chasing a digital ghost?
You can't. It leads to this massive society-wide anxiety and self-rejection.
And all of this pressure, this futility, it explains the most shocking symptom of all. The fertility apocalypse.
The 0.72 fertility rate is the ultimate biological response to systemic pain. It's the population just giving up. The government can throw all the money it wants at the problem, but it's not about money.
It's about hope.
It's about a lack of hope. Young Koreans don't want to bring a child into a world that's even more pressured and painful than their own.
And you see this really radical response from young women in particular.
The 4 no's movement. No dating, no marriage, no sex, no children. It's a powerful protest against the intense gender discrimination they face. They know that in Korea, marriage often means the end of their career and a life of shouldering most of the domestic labor, so they're just opting out.
And on top of that, the cost of raising a child to survive that educational filter, insane.
It's astronomical. So young people see having a kid as basically passing on their own debt and anxiety to the next generation. They're asking, why would I inflict hell Joseon on my own child?
The long-term consequences are baked in. A shrinking workforce, a collapsing pension system. The success of the older generation is literally being paid for by the disintegration of the future.
It's a total failure of the generational contract. And this brings us right to the K-pop paradox.
Right. The perfect cultural export. K-dramas, K-pop.
Yeah.
They sell this global fantasy of a perfect, stylish, romantic Korea.
It's maybe the most successful national branding campaign in history.
But the flip side is that this brand creates an impossible, alienating standard for the actual young people living there.
Yeah. The weight of that expectation is crushing. The average Korean guy is supposed to be like a K-drama, lead-rich, romantic, perfect. The average woman is supposed to be flawlessly beautiful and stylish. It's an unbearable amount of labor just to exist.
And the darkest side of this is what happens within the industry itself. The high-profile suicides. Jonghyun, Soli, Guhara, Moonbin. They were the ones carrying the burden of that perfect illusion.
They were forced to live a 247 performance. No bad days, no weight gain, no dating, just nonstop work under a microscope. It led to depression, eating disorders. They literally died trying to be the perfect advertisement.
And the most cynical part is that the system just replaces them. The moment one star falls, a younger, even more perfect model is ready to take their place, and the fantasy machine keeps churning.
Their deaths are framed as individual tragedies, not as a brutal critique of the system that created them.
And we hear all these stories about foreign fans who go to Seoul expecting the fantasy land they see on TV. What do they actually find?
They find reality. They find insane living costs, intense social pressure, crowded subways, and overworked people who have no time or money for the kind of romance they see in the dramas.
The dating culture is different, I'm sure.
Very. It's often highly transactional. Quick blind dates, so-gating, where your resume and your appearance are all that matter. And a lot of traditional conservative gender views still exist beneath the glossy surface.
And foreigners feel the appearance pressure too.
We've read about Western fans who get extensive plastic surgery to look more Korean, and they end up not fitting in anywhere. Not back home, and not really in Korea either. It just shows how absurd it is to chase this manufactured ideal.
So if you boil it all down, the massive success of K-pop is like a structural painkiller. It's masking this national disaster of the birth rate and suicide rate with a shiny coating of national prestige.
That's the perfect summary. And the global success actually makes things worse at home by raising the bar even higher. The ultimate victims are the Korean youth, who are forced to be the advertisement for a dream their own society won't let them have.
Okay, so we have Taiwan's economic distortion and Korea's hellish competition. Let's pull the lens back and talk about Japan, who was sort of the pioneer of all this.
Japan is the original blueprint and, you could argue, the terminal stage. They're about 30 years ahead of Korea and Taiwan in this cycle.
And their version of the disease is decades of stagnation, flat wages, and this incredibly conservative corporate culture that refuses to change.
The mood there isn't Korea's frantic anxiety. It's a collective, low-desire numbness. It's a profound systemic fatigue. They've just stopped running.
This is the Satori generation you hear about, the generation that is seen through the illusion. They don't want to buy cars or houses because they have zero expectation that the future will be better than the present.
That's right. They're too tired to even struggle. They just want to minimize debt, minimize stress. They'll take a stable but low-paying part-time job over a high-pressure corporate career track.
Why is that? I thought the corporate track was the path to stability.
It used to be. But that promise broke in the 90s. Now that permanent employee track demands total loyalty and overwork, but without the old guarantees of lifetime employment or rising wages. The Satori generation looks at that deal and says, no, thank you.
And the demographic problem in Japan is it's just on another level.
It's mathematically unsolvable under their current policies. This super aging society, combined with a deep cultural resistance to immigration, it just guarantees a collapse of the social structure. They're projecting a labor shortage of 11 million people by 2040.
11 million.
And they're trying to fix this with like AI robots and parenting subsidies, but it's just tinkering around the edges. They won't address the core problem, which is labor supply.
So to sum up the Asian trilogy, Taiwan is about a rigged economy leading to passive acceptance. Korea is about a warped social structure leading to radical resistance. And Japan is just running out of people and steam, leading to numb resignation.
That's a great way to put it. And now let's bring it home. Let's cross the Pacific and talk about the Western ailments. The U.S. elephant in the room seems less about demographics and more about cultural and political disintegration.
Right. It's all about political polarization, which is built on this foundation of decades of growing economic inequality.
The core illness here is that we've sorted ourselves into two tribes that basically live in different realities. Thanks to social media algorithms and partisan news, Republicans and Democrats don't just disagree on policy, they disagree on basic facts.
And that leads to total gridlock in Washington. But the sickness goes deeper into our daily lives. Hyper-political correctness, the woke phenomenon.
This is a really critical point in the analysis we've seen. The fear of being labeled something discriminatory, insensitive, it's so intense now, especially in universities or corporations, that it's leading to widespread self-censorship.
People are afraid to say the wrong thing, even by accident.
Right. It's this idea of a spiritual prison. You can't have an open, rational debate about difficult topics anymore because everyone is walking on eggshells. Institutions end up making decisions based on PR fear rather than critical thinking.
And you see the impact of all this pressure in the data on Gen Z.
The data is really stark. Extremely high rates of anxiety, of depression, of medication use. This generation grew up navigating a world where social media scrutiny is constant, and the landscape of identity politics is a minefield.
They're retreating from the real world because it just feels too risky.
It's the don't live in the real world syndrome. Digital spaces feel safer.
Okay, let's pivot to Europe, where the crisis looks different again. It's centered on migration and the welfare state.
Europe's elephant is the failed integration of large-scale, often low-skilled, non-European immigration. And it's the unspoken elephant because it's so politically risky to discuss it honestly.
Why is it so taboo for the political elite?
Because for decades, the consensus has been built around ideals of open borders and multiculturalism. To admit that there are negative consequences, like cultural conflict or a strain on social services, is seen as a betrayal of those ideals, or worse, as racist.
So problems are allowed to fester because no one can talk about them.
Exactly. And the consequences are real. You see the development of what some sociologists call parallel societies in some cities, communities that operate outside the mainstream culture and laws.
And this puts a huge strain on their very generous welfare states, right?
A massive strain. You have an aging native population that needs more support, and at the same time, you have a growing dependent population that increases public spending much faster than the tax base grows. It's a fiscal vice.
And the political result of all this is the rise of right-wing populism.
It's a direct reaction. The rise of parties like the AfD in Germany or the National Rally in France comes from a feeling among many citizens that the establishment is ignoring their legitimate concerns about security and social cohesion.
The analysis we saw pointed to some really shocking data from Sweden, which is always seen as this stable, utopian place.
Sweden is the case study. Skyrocketing rates of gang violence, gun crime, sexual assault, often linked to these areas with failed integration. The government's refusal to acknowledge the structural nature of the problem has led to a collapse in public trust.
So we've looked at 5 different regions, 5 unique illnesses. Taiwan's economy, Korea's anxiety, Japan's fatigue, America's division, Europe's cultural conflict. What's the thread that ties all of this together? What's the global common denominator?
If you strip away all the local symptoms, the root cause is the same everywhere. The existing economic and social structures can no longer provide a clear, sustainable, and upward path for the young generation.
The machine is still running, but the escalator is broken, at least for anyone under 40 who isn't already wealthy.
That is the fatal calculation that young people everywhere are making. They look at the system they're inheriting and they don't see opportunity. They see a rigged game.
In Taiwan, it's, I can work my tail off, but I'll never afford a home because the system is designed to inflate it away from me.
In Korea, I can destroy my youth studying 16 hours a day, But I'll probably still fail to meet the impossible standard, and I'll be stuck in debt and anxiety forever.
In Japan, I can work hard, but for what? A low-wage contract in a society that's literally shrinking around me? Why bother?
And here in the West, it's, I can play by the rules, but I'll still struggle to afford healthcare and a home, and I have to do it all while navigating a toxic, politically hostile culture where one wrong word can ruin my life.
And the final outcome of this global fatigue, it's scarily uniform, isn't it?
It's the ultimate biological response to a lack of hope. The final shared symptoms everywhere are low libido, high anxiety and depression, and a mass avoidance of marriage and having kids. The system is failing its most basic function, which is to perpetuate itself.
It's like humanity is collectively hitting the brakes on ambition and reproduction at the same time.
The system has become self-defeating. The winners are still the people who own the capital, the corporations, the asset holders. The losers are always the young, who inherit the debt, the damage, and the despair. A civilization, in effect, eating its own future.
This has been pretty heavy, but I think an incredibly important conversation about what's really going on under the surface in the world. And we have to say, this is all based on objective data and analysis, not our personal opinions or any prejudice. We're just reporting on the trends the research shows.
And the irony in Taiwan is just so stark. A super successful, healthy economy on paper, but all the wealth gets vacuumed up and sent overseas, leaving the young people at home to struggle.
While Korea's struggle is this internal anxiety, ironically fueled by the success of its own cultural exports, they sell a perfect life that their own system makes impossible to achieve.
One is a silent decay. The other is a loud implosion.
So we'll leave you with a final thought, bringing it back to our original question. If you had to choose your poison, is it harder to live in a state of constant screaming, anxious competition, like in Korea, always running, always falling short?
Or is it harder to endure the quiet, low-desire numbness of total societal fatigue, like in Japan, or a cynical, fractured West?
That's something to think about as you navigate your own country's elephant in the room.
We really encourage you to keep thinking critically about these big structural issues.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us for this session of Sip and Talk. Please subscribe wherever you're listening.
And hey, check out our old friend Mickey's YouTube channel, Mickeytolife. He's got some great memes and travel vlogs up.
He does. We'll catch you next time.